Well, thank you so much, Cheryl, for being here.
It's a treat for me.
So excited to talk with you today. So one thing that I've been learning a lot recently is that there is a very close intertwined history between Black Americans and Jewish Americans. I don't think I realized this, and I don't think a lot of other people realize this. Can you speak to it more? Where did that history stem from?
Roughly the early 20th century, when African Americans moved up from the South into northern cities, and many Jews came from Eastern Europe into those cities, is where they met and interacted. Primarily, they made common cause a lot of times because they were working in factories together. They were oppressed both because of racism, of course, as you know, and anti-Semitism. And so they interacted in all kinds of interesting ways in the cities. And even though there was a lot of resistance to working together because everyone hated them both, so the lead up during World War II, it became really clear that African Americans and Jewish Americans were both targeted really quite significantly, and the danger of Hitler was very much like the danger of Jim Crow. And so the two communities started making common cause, essentially. So the economic ways that they were working together, like in unions and things like that, joined with this political sense that they really got to get together and work politically. And so they became really, in many ways, the backbone of the civil rights movement. Black people in the center, of course, but Jews were really quite important in working with them. And so there was a lot of collaboration between Black and Jewish people and groups all the way through. And that lasted really through the 70s and 80s. And then things calmed down as the civil rights movement kind of quieted down. It's never gone away. There's been lots of collaboration, but you don't hear about it the same way since.
Yeah, I don't feel like I hear about it as much these days, but it's really interesting to hear the historical context there. And especially there is that commonality of anti-Blackness and anti-Semitism that kind of united them. And then can you speak to a little more to the way that economic solidarity ended up coming about? What did that look like?
Yeah, it's really interesting because people always think of Jews as well off or whatever, but it's really not true. When they first came here, most Jews were unskilled or semi-skilled. They worked in industry just like Black people did, factory floors, sewing, that kind of stuff. My grandfather sewed coats, for example, in a sweatshop. So all these people, how are you going to strike? And for better wages, you can't, because if you quit, someone else is going to take your job. It doesn't take any skill. So the only way you could work was getting everybody to strike together so that nobody was there to take your job. And that was a totally new way of striking. And so Black and Jewish workers who were working in these industries tried to get everybody into their union. It was a totally different model. And so these early unions, like the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, which was a Jewish union, was one of the first to welcome Black workers. And so these early unions were very heavily Black and Jewish and worked to bring everybody in. And so that kind of solidarity stayed. And so as time went on, Black people, as you know, continued to be discriminated against, and Jews had faced a little less discrimination, and so they did rise economically, but they didn't lose that bond. And so you see Jewish business owners being more willing to hire Black people than other whites.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's neat to see or to hear about the way that the solidarity between those groups allowed for a lot of impact to actually happen, a lot of progress to be made with those unions. Mm-hmm. I'm curious if you have any thoughts around that power of that solidarity and the way that some people might try to disrupt it, whether it's dividing people.
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the things that's so interesting to me, is that there are other poor groups, of course. Italians were poor, the Irish were poor, and they chose to act like white people. No, we're white. We don't like Black people either. And as a result, they lost out because they didn't make common cause with these other workers. Jews said, no, we know what it's like to be an outcast. We know you're not going to let us in either. And so they made common cause. And the result was they had this huge group that worked together. And so that kind of opportunity made these really significant and powerful organizations.
And I'm curious, What do you think about the ways that, if at all, policy might be used to divide people? You were mentioning how Jewish Americans might have faced a little less discrimination than Black Americans, and so the wealth opportunities changed. I learned about something with like the GI Bill and suburbanization, things like that. Are there ways that policy ends up playing into how people can have a prosperous financial future?
That plays into racism too, you mean? Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Things like the GI Bill, which is a bill that made money and opportunity available to returning soldiers after the war. It was available to everybody, but Black soldiers were often unable to take advantage of it for various reasons having to do with racism. And so white soldiers, including Jewish soldiers, were able to take advantage of money for mortgages and education. And so they were able to rise up through the system, and Black workers were not, Black soldiers were not. So you have white workers, including Jews, buying houses, moving into suburbs, getting jobs and opportunities. And so you start getting this wealth gap and opportunity gap that has everything to do with race, even though they say it doesn't, right? Because of these policies that are not supposed to be about race, but they are. And even beyond those sorts of opportunities, things like the mortgage policies themselves, the federal government actually had maps that ranked neighborhoods by, among other things, the number of Black people who lived there. And if you had a lot of Black people living there and a lot of poor people living there, you couldn't get a mortgage. And so that meant that if you wanted to live in a nicer neighborhood, it was easier to get a mortgage. So you have people who have money living in nicer neighborhoods, and you have people who can't afford to get a house all stuck in these terrible neighborhoods. And so you have, in the United States, having a house is part of your wealth. And so you have more and more opportunity to develop wealth in these nice neighborhoods, which are aided by these policies that exclude Black people and exclude poor people. So there's lots of ways in which these policies hurt Black people in general. And so even equally poor white people, including Jews, white Jews, of course, can rise up. And then they say, but why can't everybody rise? I took advantage of this, and they don't always see the structure of racism because it's not obvious. You know, they don't say Black people can't apply. It's just true.
Yeah. Yeah, it's this myth of meritocracy, but it ignores the racist past that we have and present of how policy is actively racist oftentimes.
Exactly. Even when I bought my house, my real estate agent, we wanted to live in a particular neighborhood because it was economically and racially mixed. And my real estate agent kept saying, but if you buy on the other side of the neighborhood, there's so much more resale value. She kept talking about resale value. And sure, because there are fewer multifamily homes and there are fewer Black people. But you don't have to say that.
Yeah, it's the whole idea of, the other side of the tracks. I feel like I hear that all the time in movies and kind of the vernacular that people use.
And so those kind of structures are invisible to white people because they don't talk about it overtly. And so it's really easy to miss that if you're not paying attention.
Yeah.
But people who have experienced this kind of these kinds of structural barriers themselves, including many Jews, get it. And so that, again, is part of this understanding between people on the left. Again, many Jews came from the left in Eastern Europe. They already came radicalized, right? So this kind of tradition of understanding these structural impediments really brought these people together. And even though Jews are increasingly economically well off, they remain essentially progressive in their economic politics for just that reason.
Yeah. And kind of going back to that original, like that point of pain whenever they were both groups that migrated, I think nowadays we're experiencing a whole nother wave of xenophobia and racism for people who are immigrating to the United States. I'm curious, what are your thoughts as you see this, for one, but also how has it how has it resulted in the past in the United States, and has it been for the better or for the worse? What would you say?
Immigration, you mean? Oh, well, all my grandparents immigrated, so of course it's obvious to me that the whole country was founded on immigration, forced in the case of African Americans, but other than Native Americans, we're all immigrants. I hate to say the obvious here. Right, but remember, e pluribus unum, it's our motto, from many one. That's the whole point, is that we, unlike other places where it's all about your bloodline, quote unquote, we bring all the talents of all the cultures of all our different perspectives together. And we celebrate that. That's the whole point of America, is that we come for an idea and not for bloodlines. And that's been lost. And so I think particularly now, Jews are, in fact, I think, and other recent migrants are in the forefront of this fight about immigration, because it is our grandparents who came. All the folks who came after World War II, all the refugees and people who came in recent years, all recognize that we got here as refugees, as immigrants, trying to make a better life, and now families are being split up. It's inconceivable to me. It's just inconceivable to me. You know, my grandmother came here and then she brought my grandfather. To think about my mother, who might, as a child, have her father taken away from her, it's unimaginable. It's unimaginable. And so I think that's why you see so many Jews and other groups who have relatively recently immigrated, in part in the front lines. So I just think, I mean, if you think about the people who have, to be obvious here, people like Einstein, people like all those Nobel laureates, these are not Native Americans. These are people who immigrated. These are people whose families immigrated. They are the people who say America is the opportunity, and they come. So how could we possibly turn them away? It blows my mind. But that's because I'm part of that sort of lefty black Jewish thing, you know.
But it's true. I mean, this country is an immigrant story. I mean, everyone other than Native Americans, they have come from somewhere. And that's certainly the case with my family. Like, I'm mixed, and on my mom's side, Filipino immigrants are my grandparents. And on my dad's side, Irish Catholic. But a few generations ago, they came from Ireland to, you know, come here for opportunity the same way so many others have.
And the story of the Irish is, of course, exactly the same. People left because of hunger and starvation. There's economic opportunity here, and there's also political persecution, right? In Ireland, there's all sorts of strife between the Protestants and the Catholics, and and the same thing with the Jews, obviously, and the same thing with many other groups. You come for economic reasons, you come for political reasons, and that's true today. And it's heartbreaking that we are not the kind of place that we used to be, that welcomed people. So I'm with you.
Yeah. I'm also curious, as we are talking about the modern age and, you know, all the hardships that are going on right now, I think a lot of people are feeling very existential. They're feeling very jaded around what's going on. How do you combat that? Like, how do we even start fighting that existentialism?
It's a great question, and I confess I struggle with myself. But in my real life, I'm a historian, and I study African American history. And when life gets really depressing, I just say to myself, remember the 1920s, remember 1906, whatever, when African Americans who had in recent memory been freed from slavery and had opportunities, had all of those opportunities taken from them, and were denied the right to vote and denied all sorts of rights of citizenship, couldn't get jobs, Jim Crow discrimination, humiliated and lynched. You couldn't walk down the street without wondering if someone was going to string you up from a tree or rape you to prove some kind of white supremacy. And yet, they persevered, they fought, they opened printing presses to talk about race, to talk about lynching. They opened the NAACP, they covered this information. They fought against unbelievably terrible odds. With no rights at all in order to win. I can't imagine the kind of hopelessness and despair that this community encountered and faced, and yet they persevered. I don't know how they did it, but that's what drew me to the field in the first place, and that's what I cling to in my most despairing moments, is that people with no power and total despair still found a way to move forward and find some dignity and some justice, and actually, in the end, to win their rights back. And I hold on to that.
Yeah. Oh, I really like that perspective. And there's a quote I love that is, courage is contagious. And I feel like we sometimes think that means you have to look for courage in the present day, and there's certainly places for that. But also historically, there's so many examples of incredible courage.
And the other way to find strength, I have to say, is in community. If you think about the civil rights movement, for example, what did they do in those marches? What did they do when they were in the jails? They sang. They sang because they needed to stand together. We don't have to wait for some great person to come and save us. We're in it together, and as a community, even if individually we don't have any power, together we have a lot of power. And that takes an incredible amount of courage, but if you build it, it's there. It takes a lot of courage, but there's lots of role models out there.
On that topic of community, how have alliances formed, and what did those look like between Black Americans and Jewish Americans?
Yeah, community isn't just between individuals, it's between groups, and it's so important because groups don't always see eye to eye, but if you can build alliances around shared goals, it's huge. It's not just about unions, which of course we talked about, it's these political organizations like the NAACP, right, which is founded around the importance of Black equality, right, and citizenship. It's not just Black Americans who are on the board. It's founded by W.B. Du Bois and Black Americans, but they're joined by all sorts of important white Americans, and interestingly, more than a disproportionate number of the white Americans who found it are Jews. Again, because of this shared understanding of what oppression is about and the structures of racism and anti-Semitism and how people are excluded structurally from citizenship. And you see this over and over again, and it's why so many of the civil rights organizations have Black and Jewish members at their center. The Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, for example, is led all the way through the 60s by a Black man and a Jewish man, because both groups recognize the relationship between anti-Semitism and racism and the dangers of both, so that the linkage between their interests is so strong. One of my favorite examples is in the 1940s, the Anti-Defamation League has this flyer that they pass out to a bunch of their members, and it says, "The Klan is a threat today." And it says, we know that the Klan hates Black people, but anybody who comes for Black people today is going to come for Jews tomorrow. So we have to oppose the Klan today. So there's this absolute clarity that when anybody's rights are threatened, everybody's rights are threatened. And it's that kind of solidarity that brings Black and Jewish people together, Black and Jewish groups together, and really forms this set of coalitions between them that is so important. And it's exactly the same kind of collaboration that you're talking about in unions, in protests. If you can get that kind of community built, the potential power is huge. And building coalitions is, I think, the key to any kind of political action.
Yeah, that's incredibly profound, that connection that you're talking about, and that feeling of, they might be targeting this group, but it's all connected. They come for us next, and we are all, sharing that oppression and that history in the same way. So that's I really love how you framed that.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because, as I said before, the Jews who came from Eastern Europe were white people. They didn't think of themselves as white because, of course, white people killed them in Europe, but they were physically white, and they didn't therefore face, say, Jim Crow segregation. So they could have acted white. They said, "Oh, we hate Black people. We're good white people." Jews didn't make that choice. They said, "We know they're coming after us next. We are not taking that position of whiteness. We are going to embrace the fact that we are a vulnerable minority." And it's that choice that led them into exactly what you're saying, this coalition of the vulnerable, and to fight and to say that everybody's interests are linked. I think that really built the backbone of those kinds of effective movements.
On that topic, there was something that I was reading about some schools that I think showed that kind of relationship or alliance between Jewish people and Black people. And I can't remember the name of it, but can you share a little bit more if you know what I'm talking about?
Yes. Rosenwald was actually one of the founders of the Sears Roebuck. He was wealthy, he was Jewish, and he really believed in Booker T. Washington believed in black education to help black people who, of course, weren't able to be educated in the South. And so Rosenwald volunteered to build schools across the South for black students. And he built hundreds of schools. And actually, they built it with the buy-in of the black community. It had nothing to do with Jews, it had nothing to do with Rosenwald, but he really believed in the idea of education and believed in Booker T. Washington's idea. He gave money for artists, including lots of the famous artists that we know now got Rosenwald funds to continue their artwork when they lost all their other opportunities. So he funded lots of artists and writers and schools, again, because he saw the same thing that we were talking about before, these opportunities that black people could not take advantage of.
Yeah, and it seems like that's something where if you invest in the people, it lifts everybody up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. He came from that tradition that saw that kind of spacious idea of if somebody is vulnerable, we're all vulnerable.
Yeah, that's
I
really
like
great.
him.
Thank you so much, Cheryl, for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it was my pleasure. It was really a treat to be here. Thanks.